Hi everyone, it's Jeannie from Makers Unify. Today I'm going to show you how I took Dollar Tree planters and turned them into high-end planters for your summer garden. If you would take a quick moment right now to subscribe to my channel, that would be great. First of all, for all the planters, you will need to spray with a primer paint, either in white or clear. Doing this will make sure that the paints you use later will adhere to the pots. So here I'm spraying with a white primer, and I ended up using 2 coats to make sure that it was covered pretty well. You will also need to paint the inside rim, as this area will still show even when you put dirt and plants in your pot. For this pot, I'm going to use the IOD mold birdsong that I purchased from Sweet and Sassy Treasures in Shelby Township, Michigan. I'll link their website below. I'm using cornstarch inside the mold so that it will be easier to release the casting. And next time, I'll remember you can just brush it in, it's a lot easier. So this is my first time trying these molds, and I'm using air dry clay that I picked up from Michael's. So you just need to pinch off some and kind of knead it a little bit, and then you just push it down into the molds. The nice thing about these molds is that there is a lip around the edge, so that as you're pushing the clay down and around the mold, you can push your fingers along the edges to clean it up. I'm using E6000 glue to adhere the birds to the planter, making sure to hold for a bit to make sure that the casting doesn't slide down the pot. This mold that I'm using has 7 different birds that you can use. I'm a little delicate with this one. I didn't want it to crack, so you have to be gentle as they are still a little bit, they're still wet. So again, I'm using the E6000 glue, and I'm going to hold the planter or the bird on the planter for a little bit to make sure that it adheres. And then I take a baby wipe after I'm done, gently pressing it down to clean up the glue along the edges of the bird. For the paint, I'm going to use a mixture of paint and baking soda to give it a more textured, almost cement look. The paint color I'm using is called Terracotta. It's just an acrylic that I picked up at Michael's. So I mix up about half paint to half baking soda and mix it all together really well. And then I will use a chip brush to paint the mixture on the planter. And a chip brush will also help to give it a more texturized look that I'm going for. Used 1 coat of the paint mixture for this planter, but after I'm done painting, I take a baby wipe and I wipe off some of the paint on the birds to pull out a little of the detail on the birds. And I'll also make sure again to paint the inside rim so that it looks nice after you've planted your flowers, and because the inside rim will still show. I then sprayed 2 coats of the clear matte spray by Rust-Oleum to give the planter a nice finish and to protect the paint as these pots will be staying outside. Here's the finished pot, and I have to say it turned out pretty good. I used pansies in all the planters I painted, as the weather in Michigan still gets chilly and pansies are pretty hardy this time of year. For the second set of planters, I wanted ones that already had some texture on them, so I purchased 2 of these at the Dollar Tree. For the first one, I'm using a furniture and cabinet paint that I had from another project. I did not prime these with white or clear spray, as I wanted to see if this type of paint would adhere without the primer. So I painted half of this one and I set it aside to dry so I could see what it would look like. For the second planter, I'm using a chalk paint in white. Again, I didn't prime this planter, and 2 coats of the chalk paint seem to adhere fine. I like that the texture is coming through, and I ended up using my heat gun to dry the paint between coats. So for the blue one, you can see that the paint did not adhere very well, even after I tried to dry it with the heat gun. So I ended up spraying with the Rust-Oleum Matte Clear Spray and letting that dry before I painted with the blue paint again. The matte clear on this one so that the paint can adhere. So for the white planter, I'm taking the blue paint and mixing with water to thin it out a little bit. I painted over the white planter with the blue paint, and I'm going to do this in sections. And then I'll take a baby wipe and pull some of it off. This will give a little more dimension to the planter and show off the texture that's already there. Blue planter, I'm going to do the opposite color of what I did with the other planter. I'm using the white chalk paint, and I'm going to water that down a bit. And then again, I'll do it in sections. I'll paint the white chalk paint water mixture on, and then wipe it off with a baby wipe like I did the other planter. And again, I'll spray with the Rust-Oleum Matte Clear to give the planter a protective finish. And they turned out so cute. I really liked how they turned out. Now this next one turned out to be my favorite. I actually did some research on IOD's YouTube page and came across a video they did using their trim mold. So again, I'm going to use the air dry clay and IOD's trim mold number 2. I'll put the link to the IOD video in the description below. So for this one, I'm going to put the trim on the upper lip of the planter, and I did spray the planter with the Rust-Oleum Matte Clear, as I figured out by this time that I needed to make sure to do this step. So again, I need the air clay, and I got a brush this time to brush the cornstarch into the mold. And then after kneading the clay for a little bit, you roll it and stretch it. You press the clay down onto the mold and push it in and level it out and take off any excess that you don't need. Just this great tool from the Dollar Tree, which really helps to scrape it down and get the excess off. You can find it in the paints department by All the Crafts. So after pulling the casting from the mold, I want to make sure it will fit properly on the planter. I then decide that I want to use the it's called Titebond Thick and Quick to adhere to the planter. Josie and Sally from IOD, which stands for Iron Orchard Designs, suggest using this glue as it adheres quicker and doesn't slip as much as the E6000 does. So I squeeze some onto the back of the casting, and I use a paintbrush to spread out the glue before placing on the planter. And then I'll clean it up with a baby wipe. So I continue the process of molding the casting and then gluing on until I've gone all the way around the planter. And as you're going around, you can pinch the sides together and try and kind of smush them together a little bit without damaging the print, because this will shrink up a little bit as it dries. So make sure that you let the air clay dry thoroughly before you start painting. And again, I'm using the baking soda and paint mixture. I've mixed together a tan color with some white and then a little bit of terracotta from the first planter I did. And I mix this together with the baking soda, and I will use a chip brush again to paint on. And as I go over the castings with the paint, I'm just kind of tapping it on there so that the paint gets into all the crevices. I decided that I wanted to brush off some of the paint mixture from the casting. It was a little bit chunky with the baking soda mixture, so I used a clean dry brush and cleaned up the crevices a bit. So this is where I get really excited as a planter starts to look really good. I'm using half mixture of white wax by Home Decor and half of white paint. I learned this technique from Julie at Julie's Design and Signs, and I'll link her channel below, but it gives it a whiter color than the cream color that the wax is. So I'm painting this on in sections, and at first I was a little worried because it went on very thick and I couldn't see the color underneath, but I knew I was going to wipe a lot off. And at first I used a paper towel to start wiping off the wax paint mixture, but then some of the fibers from the paper towel were sticking to the planter. So then I ended up using a rag to wipe off the excess, and that worked a lot better. I then used a baby wipe to pull more of the wax up, and that's when the planter really started to look good. I went around the planter in sections, and I really like how it turned out. I think this is one of my favorite planters. So you can see how the brown underneath really starts to come out and how the planter looks nice and aged. Just think of all the color combinations that you can experiment with and see what happens. Final product, and I really like how this one turned out. And again, I did coat it with the Rust-Oleum Clear Matte Spray to protect the finish so that I could use it outside. So I hope you're excited about this project and ready to try your hand at turning Dollar Tree planters into high-end planters for your garden this year. Let me know in the comments which one is your favorite, and make sure to let me know if you tried this hack and how it turned out. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.